Good afternoon and welcome. Please know that this meeting will be recorded. If you do not want to be recorded, please leave the webinar now. Hi, my name is Jessie Diaro. I'm the lead program officer with the NSF Advanced program. Welcome to the 5th in our series this month, celebrating the 20th anniversary of Advance and the 30th anniversary of the Division of Human Resource Development, which manages the Advanced program as well as many other diversity, equity, and inclusion programs funded by the NSF. It's my great privilege today to introduce to you the inaugural Advanced Program Officer, Alice Hogan, who in 2001 was the person who made the first Advance awardees. But more than that, she also helped design the Advance program, helped to ensure that it include a component that focused on systemic change in order to enhance equity for STEM faculty in the sciences and technology, engineering, and mathematics. This is a critical piece of the Advanced program, and it represents an important addition to the NSF portfolio in terms of our strategies for improving equity, diversity, and inclusion in the sciences. I'm very pleased to have her today to make remarks and introduce our two speakers. And I will be turning it over to Alice now. Alice, you can go ahead and join, turn on the, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the final webinar celebrating 20 years of Advance. I'm grateful to Jessie and Tatiana for this opportunity to introduce two of the original group of Advanced PIs for institutional transformation. But first, I would like to thank all of the Advanced program directors who have continued, expanded, and enhanced the Advanced program at NSF. It has truly evolved and flourished, and I am especially thankful for Jessie's leadership, which secured Advance its own line item in the budget. Well done. My history with Advance, as Jessie mentioned, actually predates 2001. It goes back to July 1999 when I was working in the International Division of NSF. I was summoned to the director's office and asked if I would be willing to lead an effort to rethink NSF's approach to advancing gender equity. To say this came out of the blue to me is an understatement, but I recognize that with support from the deputy director, Joe Bordogna, and the opportunity to work with a group of exceptionally talented colleagues from across the foundation, we might get something done that would be creative and important. It took over a year to get through the design and implementation phase, lots of back and forth between the committee and NSF management, but suddenly it seemed the first Advanced solicitation was ready to go. We had no idea what to expect, and after chairing the Advanced Coordination Committee and the Advanced Implementation Committee, I agreed to serve as the program director for the new program with some trepidation. Together with Pat Sims, the program assistant, and Janet Sosa, Advance's Haku intern, we held our breath to see what would come next. Luckily, within NSF, there were a number of early advocates for the program. Their help and support, as you can imagine, was invaluable. The director, Rita Caldwell, encouraged us to think across all the disciplines to identify challenges at different career stages. The deputy director, Joe Bordogna, challenged our assumptions and urged us not to think small. Debbie Crawford, who was then in the director's office, sat with me and reworked sections of the solicitation to ensure maximum support across the foundation. The members of the AIC helped identify reviewers and panelists. We worked on a very short time frame with the minimum allowable time between release of the solicitation and the deadline to receive proposals. There were 72 proposals for institutional transformation that first year, a number which stayed remarkably consistent for several years. Since there was, at that time, no advanced community to draw on for reviewers, we reached widely across disciplines, ranks, institutional types, geographic areas. In the end, as you probably know, we recommended 9 proposals for funding, 2 of which will be represented today, Michigan and Hunter College. The original group included the University of Colorado at Boulder, the University of Puerto Rico at Humacao, New Mexico State University, Georgia Tech, the University of Washington, the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and the University of California, Irvine. 20 years later, we are still building on and moving beyond anything we originally thought possible. And it is, in my view, largely thanks to that original group of PIs who took an unformed opportunity and gave it life. I am so honored to be part of this exceptionally creative, dedicated, and innovative community, and I am amazed that it's 20 years. Now I'm thrilled to introduce today's speakers. There will be 2 speakers. First will be Virginia Valian, followed by Abby Stewart. I will introduce Abby and then Virginia. But actually, probably neither of them needs any introduction to any of you. Abby Stewart is Sandra Schwartz Tangri Distinguished University Professor of Psychology and Women's Studies at the University of Michigan. She was the PI for the Advanced Institutional Transformation Award in 2001 and served as director of the University of Michigan Advanced Program for many years, retiring from that role only recently. She is past director of Women and Gender Studies Program and the founding director of the Institute for Research on Women and Gender. Abby has published many articles and several books focusing on feminist theory and the psychology of women's lives, personality, and adaptation to personal and social changes. The list goes on and on. Abby and Virginia both begged me not to read the whole list of their accomplishments at this time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about their role in Advance from my perspective. Abby is a sought-after advisor and speaker for the Advance community. In 2001, she and Virginia Valian, together with the other first-round Advance PIs, were the Advance community, and their commitment to making Advance a data-driven program informed by the latest scholarly work and focused on sustainable institutional change created a foundation we continue to stand on today. Abby brings keen and strategic insight to the challenges of finding ways to engage colleagues across many disciplines in seeing and understanding their own behavior and the ways in which it shapes the institution. She is exceptionally skilled at meeting people where they are and bringing them along to a place where they feel equipped to contribute and lead on issues of diversity and inclusion, and that includes me. Stride at Michigan is a perfect example of this approach. She's exceptionally effective at diagnosing and recommending approaches to institutional challenges, and her expertise has guided so many Advance initiatives. Virginia Valian is Distinguished Professor of Psychology at Hunter College and a member of the doctoral faculties of Psychology, Linguistics, and Speech, Language, Hearing Sciences at the CUNY Graduate Center. She directs the Language Acquisition Research Center at Hunter College and is the director of Hunter's Gender Equity Project. She works both on gender equity and the psychology of language. In gender equity, she performs research on the reasons behind women's slow advancement in the professions and proposes remedies for individuals and institutions. She is the author of Why So Slow? The Advancement of Women, and co-author with Abigail Stewart of An Inclusive Academy, Achieving Diversity and Excellence, which we will hear about shortly. Virginia is one of the PIs in round 1 of Abigail Advance's Institutional Transformation Awards, was instrumental in helping establish the scholarly foundations of Advance, bringing her research experience and extensive knowledge of relevant literature across many fields to the creation and advancement of pragmatic approaches to institutional change. Her online tutorials for change, gender schemas, and science careers are invaluable resources. As a speaker, Virginia communicates such authority and expertise, audiences cannot look away. I was intrigued and delighted after several years of working with Virginia to find her 1977 article, Learning to Work, which I suspect has excellent advice for all of us, but is also funny, insightful, and absolutely did not correspond to the Virginia Valian I thought I knew. I recommend it highly. Virginia continues to consult with institutions and organizations to improve gender equity and is widely respected and appreciated for exceptional leadership in this area. In 2018, Abby and Virginia published a book focused on social science research that helps explain why higher education has struggled to become truly inclusive and provides guidance on the principles, design, and implementation of initiatives aimed at realizing that goal. We look forward to discussion of that book today, and I am delighted to introduce Virginia Valian.
Thank you, Alice, and hello, everyone. It is wonderful for Abby Stewart and me to be here, and it's wonderful to be introduced by Alice Hogan. In 2000, Alice invited me to attend a workshop that would discuss what form NSF's new initiative in improving the recruitment and retention of women would take. I thus learned of Advance before Advance became Advance. I had no idea then how much I would learn from Alice during and after her tenure as program director at NSF. Alice had and has both a broad understanding of how all the pieces of gender equity fit together in institutions and a detailed understanding of the individual pieces. Through Alice, I learned about a new world, a world of people like my collaborator, Abby Stewart, who were already opening doors for women in science and would open more. My colleague, Vita Rabinowitz, and I wrote our advanced proposal, founded Hunter's Gender Equity Project, and entered that new world. The successes of the advanced program include both intended and, I think, unanticipated changes. The intended changes are the improved practices in institutions around the country. The unanticipated changes are the leaders it has provided opportunities to. In part, institutions have improved because of the new leaders who are directing them. Vita Rabinowitz became provost of Hunter College and then provost of all of CUNY, as well as interim chancellor of CUNY. Anne-Marie Nichols-Granenko, our director of research, is now University Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs at CUNY. One PI said to me, "People listen to me now because of NSF, and now that they're listening, they discover that I have something to say." So in the firm expectation that Advance will continue to support efforts to make institutions more inclusive and welcoming, and will support the leaders who are engaged in that effort, Abby and I will give our talk in two parts. The first part is an analysis of what still goes wrong in institutions. The second part is our recommendations for reducing the impact of the errors that we are likely to make in order, our recommendations are in order to improve those institutions. And I will now share my screen. Okay. And of course, there we go. So our sources include the work that advanced institutions have been doing, research and theory in social science, our own experiences in our own institutions and through visiting other institutions. And we have tried to assimilate and organize that knowledge in our book, An Inclusive Academy. I wish that we had time to mention all of the people from whom we have learned. From the first cohort, I'd like to particularly mention Molly Carnes, Joe Handelsman, and Jennifer Sheridan, Sue Rosser and Mary Frank Fox, the late Denise Denton, Eve Riskin, Joyce Yen and Anamari Kause, Lisa Freehill and Vada Cruzado, and Patricia Rankin. I also want particularly to mention Pat Sims, whom Alice referred to, who was an invaluable help at every point along the way. So the crux of the matter is evaluations. Evaluations are ubiquitous in academia. Our work is evaluated, and we evaluate other people's work, and people are evaluated. We're evaluated, and we evaluate other people. Not only are evaluations ubiquitous, they're consequential and cumulative. Even the small judgments that we make are things that add up. Being listened to or not during a meeting means that we're recognized or not as having good ideas. That gets us to an important point, namely the accumulation of advantage, the compound interest that attaches to success, and the accumulation of disadvantage, the compound interest that attaches to failure. The accumulation of advantage means that even small differences in treatment add up over time. I mentioned the meeting earlier. That seems to be something that is very resistant to change. Susan makes a comment, no one pays any attention. 5 minutes later, Joe makes the same comment and everybody says, what a great idea. All of those little things, those little molehills that people tell you not to attend to, they add up to mountains. Finally, our judgments are subject to error. Indeed, the field of decision-making and many subfields of social and cognitive psychology would not exist because there would be no subject matter if people consistently made evaluations correctly. I'm going to briefly review 5 sources of error in evaluations. Fortunately for social psychology and cognitive psychology, this list is not exhaustive. I want to emphasize at the outset that although we are calling these processes sources of error, and they are sources of error, they also all serve valuable cognitive functions. We've developed these processes for good reasons, but they lead us astray in the area of evaluations. So to start, let's look at people's confidence in their own objectivity. It would be very hard to get along in the world if one were constantly second-guessing one's judgments. But belief in one's objectivity leads one to have misplaced confidence in the accuracy of one's judgment. For example, a study by Lindner and colleagues examined the effects of giving people a 5-item questionnaire that encouraged them to think that they were objective. A sample question was, when forming an opinion, I try to objectively consider all of the facts. People already think that they're objective, but this questionnaire made that salient. Another group of participants did not fill out the questionnaire. The participants who were encouraged to think that they were objective were more likely to then engage in age discrimination. Interestingly, the experimenters tried in another condition to prime people to think that they were biased, but they were not very successful because people are biased to think that they're objective. The next item is confidence in one's own expertise, and that's related to confidence in one's own objectivity. This is a reasonable cognitive strategy in situations where we really have expertise and can make fast, intuitive decisions well. But this belief in one's ability to make snap decisions in judging people's merit and people's potential ignores 3 important limits. First, we often don't get data telling us whether we were right or wrong for quite some time. we can have forgotten what our judgment was. So we don't have the opportunity to recalibrate our thinking. A second limit is that our belief in our expertise interacts with confirmation bias, in which we tend to count the correct judgments that we made. I always knew that person would be a star, and ignore the incorrect judgments. The third limit is that our beliefs and our ability to judge merit can create the conditions that foster or discourage merit, thus falsely confirming our expertise. We create a self-fulfilling prophecy. When we treat people as if we think they are likely to succeed, they indeed are more likely to be successful. And when we treat them as if we think they are likely to fail, they become less successful. Perhaps the most pernicious in this group of three sources of error is the belief that one's good intentions are sufficient, ignoring the adage about what the road to hell is paved with. A number of studies by Monin, Miller, and colleagues find that suggestions to people that they are fair, such as if they endorsed Obama rather than McCain for president, compared to no suggestion, leads to their being more likely to suggest a white man as chief of police than a black man. By reminding themselves how fair they are, people feel licensed to be unfair. People want to be fair. They pride themselves on being fair as well as objective. One of the most common remarks we hear when we visit schools is, I don't care who they are, I just want the best person. People think that their good intentions and their objectivity inoculate them against unfairness. The literature on moral licensing teaches us to be humble about our good intentions, not to pat ourselves on the back because we have them. The fourth source of error is schemas. Schemas are another natural cognitive structure that we use to make quick categorizations, and they serve us well in many situations. We have schemas about everything: objects, events, social roles. We now have very detailed schemas about webinars, for example. The term schema is similar to stereotype, but schema is more neutral and more inclusive, so we prefer that term. We can't treat each new person we see as if we know nothing about the social groups they belong to. But when we see individuals through a schematic lens, we evaluate their performance in part via our beliefs about the social groups that they belong to. For example, work by Moss-Racusin and colleagues has shown that scientists, chemists, physicists, and biologists evaluate a dossier for a lab manager less positively if it has a female rather than a male name at the top. This was true for both male and female evaluators, and it was particularly true for those scientists who believe that gender discrimination is a thing of the past. In most experiments, we should add, there are no gender differences in evaluations of men and women. We all make use of gender schemas. Finally, our tendency to rely on proxy measures of excellence is likely to privilege the already privileged. Consider letters of recommendation and prestige. We know that women are less likely than men to receive their degrees from research-intensive institutions like Harvard University, and that African Americans are particularly less likely than whites to receive their degrees from high prestige institutions. To the extent that we rely on a proxy like prestige of institution in evaluating white women and men of women of color, we will disadvantage them at the outset. We also know that women are less likely than men to have been sponsored by Nobel Prize winners and other highly recognized scientists. Starting with work by Trix and Psenka, We know that letter writers are more likely to use words like outstanding and brilliant for men than women, and are more likely to include doubt raisers, qualifications, and hedges in letters for women than men. My personal favorite is, she has a somewhat challenging personality. We can guess that the Chris in this letter is a man rather than a woman, given the sprinklings of brilliant, superb, and outstanding. The word brilliant is used more in some fields than others, but an interactive data visualization by Ben Schmidt of Rate My Professor ratings shows that brilliant is used more often in reviews of men than women in all 25 fields, including accounting, where almost no one is rated as brilliant. Finally, we know that things like impact of the journal that you publish your research in, H-index, and so on, number of citations, those are also affected by prestige factors. So given the 5 areas of error that I've just reviewed, what can we do about it? Here are 5 principles for change that are designed to mitigate the effects of the errors I've just discussed, and Abby will now review them.
I'm only going to take a moment to thank Virginia for introducing this section of our talk, and also to thank Alice and Jesse for the invitation and for the amazing introduction. I'll have more to say about all that at the end, but I don't want to interrupt the flow of ideas here. So when Virginia and I, back in the early 2000s, and when we were working on our book, when we tried to think about, okay, let's tie the mechanisms we know something about in social science to processes of institutional change, it turned out we felt we had happened on a pretty powerful approach to institutional change. And an approach that seems intuitively obvious now in retrospect, but at the time wasn't really what academic institutions were doing. First of all, many were not thinking about change or trying to change. And those that were, and there were some, trying to be more inclusive, trying to promote the success of underrepresented individuals in different fields, didn't have a good handle on how to go about it. So one of the issues that we kind of center in the book and in our thinking is that actually social scientists in all social science fields know some things that are helpful for thinking about how to make changes when that's what we're trying to do. And of course, the advanced program from the beginning encouraged the use of social science knowledge in thinking about how to operate to increase the inclusiveness of the STEM disciplines. And that initial idea of collaboration between scientists, hard scientists, physical and natural scientists with social scientists has made a huge mark within the advanced community and within our institutions. So one of the important things social science knowledge can do is offer ideas about how to motivate change that might be more successful than the ideas that seem intuitive. So one of the critical ones that Virginia's been talking about is improving the fairness and accuracy of the judgment process. When we thought seriously about all that we know about the difficulty with our judgments, it became easier to understand why so many people felt unfairly served by institutional processes and that inaccurate decisions were being made. And yet at the same time, as Virginia clearly articulated, everybody felt very fair and very accurate. So that was a dilemma that was at the heart of the problem. Too much confidence in the fairness and accuracy, while at the same time, plenty of inaccuracy and unfairness needed to get addressed. So thinking that through was core to all of our efforts to figure out how to create better judgments of job candidates, of each other, our colleagues, and of our students. And the second kind of big motivator was recognizing that, in fact, and Virginia talked a little bit about this, instead of creating conditions that fulfill the prophecies of our initial intuitive judgments, instead we need to create conditions that maximize everybody's performance. And of course, the scientific community was urgently concerned with the issue of team science and the need to encourage people's collaboration capacity. That could only be served if everybody could maximize their performance, rather than some people being stars and everybody else having little to contribute. So motivation and understanding the levers for change are some of the critical things that social science offered. I think another important feature is thinking about different levels of intervention, the individual level, the sort of interpersonal unit level, like departments, and the full institutional level, and separating those out. Psychologists think a lot about individual level issues, but we have to take that knowledge to the levels that sociologists and anthropologists and political scientists knew more about, the levels of departmental and whole institutional change. And of course, organizational scientists, economists, lots of folks. So this micro, macro problem and all the levels in between, it's well mapped onto social science knowledge, and we were clear we needed to draw from all of it. One of the ways to implement an understanding of these different levels is to focus on policies and procedures. Once an approach, a strategy has been reified in a policy or a practice, it proliferates through an institution, whether at the department level or at a bigger level, imperfectly, but it takes on a different life than if our interventions are focused solely on changing individuals. Change would be very, very slow and also not very successful if we focus exclusively on matters like providing information. So if we just tell people, you're actually more error prone than you think, you're not that good a judger, take it from me, our colleagues are not that enthusiastic about that message. It isn't going to change how they engage in the process of making judgments. So giving them information isn't going to solve the problem by itself. It may be important. I believe strongly that it is important because we are gated as academics to care about the evidence and the theories that are around us. And if we are persuaded that that evidence is strong, we're more likely to make changes. We know that modifying attitudes is not enough. It's very difficult to get sustained change in an attitude, to have consequences for behavior over time. Everybody in all these fields would like to be able to do that, but we know we're kind of stunningly unsuccessful at it. So that's not going to solve the problem. Instead, the other really hard problem is changing culture. But the avenue into changing institutional culture is policies and procedures. If we can change how we do our business and then implement policies that make it necessary for us to use those practices, that then guides our behavior as individuals, not just our attitudes, our confidence, our opinions. We also have learned, and here too I want to stress, we've learned a lot of these things from the advanced community. One of the things we've learned is that flawed decision-making is an easier sell to academic judgment makers, that is, faculty, than a focus on bias. Starting out with the message, you're a biased judge, doesn't get a lot of traction. It gets a lot of resistance. But if we talk about common cognitive errors that are a natural process, as Virginia emphasized, as she does so well, it serves a useful purpose. There's a good reason we do this, that we rely on fast cognition, but it does, in the wrong place, lead us to a bad outcome. People can listen to that point. So we learned that we can frame the problem in a way that's less, that's more persuasive. That's the important thing. And that brings our colleagues along quickly rather than miring us in a debate. Okay, so where do we start on policies and procedures? I get asked this a lot when people at other institutions would like advice. And you have a lot of choices. The thing we did, because we had really hardly anything to go on back then, we did a systematic review of every faculty policy at the University of Michigan for, might it have disparate impact on women, on people of color, on different communities within the faculty. It was an arduous and very interesting task. It engaged a very large group of people for a year. It wasn't a bad thing to do, but most often institutions are feeling urgency about getting a change going faster than that. And so the commonest place that most institutions have intervened for a long time was in the search and recruitment process, because the idea was we need to be bringing different kinds of folks into this academic science enterprise than we already have. So if we need to do that, searches is where we want to intervene. I do want to flag that in the last few years, institutions have been hiring less. And so more advanced institutions have chosen different points of entry. And there are many other perfectly legitimate and good points of entry. It all needs fixing. It all needs improvement. And so searches are just a commonplace, but not at all the only place. And I believe firmly that if an institution perceives itself as having a climate problem or a retention problem or a promotion to full problem, that's where you should intervene. Where you perceive the greatest need is where you will get the greatest traction, and you will be able to demonstrate impact, which is critical to all of our efforts. If we can't demonstrate impact, everybody loses heart and stops trying to change things. What we did was start with searches and then build out to other evaluation contexts. Lots of places have done that. I've now seen institutions start with the annual review, all the things that are problematic in that process, and then build to searches somewhere down the road. So you can start anywhere. That's the good thing about a system approach. It doesn't matter where you start. You're going to have to address other things, and they will naturally present themselves along the way. So for example, we focused on faculty. That was where the advanced program started. It's where it still needs to focus. But within a few years, we were asked, well, don't these evaluation issues apply to admitting graduate students? Shouldn't we focus on graduate admissions? So I said yes, and worked with the graduate school on them developing their own ideas about how to improve graduate admissions to be fairer and based on better judgments. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about starting with searches very quickly. If you do that, the first thing you want to do is get search committees to really learn about the underlying issues and helpful practices. Many institutions offer the kind of program the Stride Committee did, some kind of workshop that offers information about the research, the scholarship, and then some helpful practices that are being recommended. That's turned out to be quite a powerful vehicle, hearing from colleagues, other faculty about how to do this, hearing about the scholarship, motivating the practices, and then the practices has been, I think, a very powerful intervention, not just at Michigan, but elsewhere. You describe and explain the practices. So what kind of practices do I mean? Developing clear criteria at the beginning before you're looking at anything, any files, any candidates. so that you can then systematically review every person or piece of work on all the criteria, not just the one that you see quickly because of your own tendency to notice certain kinds of things, which could be prestige of institution or could be cool finding that fits with where I want to go in my work. It could be any kind of bias or tendency to overvalue something and not notice something else. That's what we're trying to rectify. We've all got that ability to overvalue some things and not notice others. And these procedures are designed to try to address that. So then we motivate some helpful practices, like not having committee members say, well, gee, Jack is so strong on grantsmanship and a number of publications. The fact that, you know, we hear he's a terrible colleague and he can't mentor anybody because everybody leaves his lab, we can just ignore that. So we don't want to do that. We want to actually pay attention to all of Jack's strengths and weaknesses and make a judgment based on an accurate picture of Jack. It also helps us avoid group processes where a very dominant personality might have a huge effect. If they come into a meeting and say, clearly the standout is Margaret, then nobody actually thinks very much after that. We don't want that. We want people not to get engaged in these group processes where one person has undue influence and maybe is influenced by their own desire to hire a collaborator. So we decided we needed to provide tools that would help. So for example, we actually asked every search committee, everybody who participates in a search, including all department members, to indicate before they rate candidates, what was their experience? What did they do? What work did they do? How much did they engage with the candidate's scholarship? And this list is just an example. It could have their diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. Did you engage with that? Did you engage with their own research statement? So just check these off. And we have had people report to us at Stride workshops that when they realized they were supposed to do all these things, which frankly, we all realize, but when they had to fill it out, they were embarrassed. And so they went back to the files and realized they needed to go read them and not just go on the fact that they met the candidate, for example, didn't go to their talk, didn't read their scholarship, but seemed like a really nice person. Not probably, and they've heard great things about them. So it's meant to remind people of what a slow decision looks like and how to enact it. We also encourage committees to take the time, to actually think about, as a committee, what are the criteria you want on this list that we're going to rate every single candidate on? You might want some of the things that are here, but there are also some things that are not here, like ability to attract and supervise grad students is here, but not ability to attract and supervise diverse graduate students, or interest in contributing leadership to the department's diversity, excellence, and inclusion efforts, or just interest in service and leadership. Michigan's renamed all service leadership, hoping faculty will believe that. So if you want to hire people with particular characteristics, you have to have those be part of the criteria, and then you have to actually use the criteria. So we provide this as a Word document, as a framework. We urged committees to change it, discuss it, settle on criteria that collectively they can endorse and believe in, and then use it in the meetings. Wait a minute, we didn't talk about this about a particular candidate. Okay, and then there are procedural things. Being transparent about how evaluations are going to be conducted helps applicants know what's going to happen, or tenure candidates, or third-year review, mid-career review candidates. So clarity and transparency in how the evaluation will be conducted actually also serves to remind the people doing the evaluation they have to do that. Adopt explicit practices for assessment and agree on them as a group. Try to slow the processes down. And that's another thing that spreadsheet is meant to do. It's meant to slow you down. Never, I say this always to people, don't come into a committee meeting and have everybody tell you the top 3 candidates. That's a guarantee that they're going to have used fast criteria, not slow. So you want them to be coming into the meeting, having assessed a lot of people and being quite confused. That's when you can have a productive conversation. You also want to think about reviewers when you put people on search committees, and this is, stuff we talk to chairs about. You want people to be on the committee because of their expertise, but also because of their ability to conduct a fair review. If they just hate a certain kind of research, it's not going to be a fair review of people who happen to do that kind of research. So the ability to be broad gauge, to be eclectic and value different kinds of work is a quality that may prevent some of our colleagues from being appropriate members of a search committee. And then the committee should have a serious discussion of where bias could creep in. Virginia has already talked about letters of recommendation. We know they're there. Teaching evaluations is another place where we know they're there. So just saying this person has great teaching evaluations, not a particularly effective way to set up a judgment procedure that's fair and accurate. Okay, and then you have to develop formal policies that require the practices. So, you may require search committees members to go to a workshop, and you may require them to go to it again if they haven't been in a few years. You also can make committees accountable for their outcomes. How many diverse candidates did they come up with? And can they justify the short list that they came up with, or the medium list, or whatever? So outcomes can include the pool. Were you successful at recruiting a diverse pool? And did you end up with diverse candidates making it to the short list? Making sure you had more than one reviewer for each application, that you used clear criteria, that you were transparent to the candidates about what the criteria were, your job description fit what you actually used as criteria, and then the selection of reviewers. When you're doing later evaluations, it's important in searches, especially when you're bringing people to campus, but when you're reviewing people who are your colleagues, a very important feature is respectful treatment. We held a workshop some years ago where we asked very fanciful professors in small groups to reflect on the best evaluation process they'd ever gone through and the worst. We found that people really couldn't talk about the best because they had so much to say about the worst. The time that they interacted with a department chair or a mentor and they came away from it feeling diminished, unappreciated, devalued, those were huge. This was a room full of very successful people, but all they could talk about was how disrespected and unvalued they felt. We need to have that happening a lot less, like not at all. There is no reason that in the course of an evaluative process, a person should not feel respected as a human being and as a colleague. We need the fair evaluation processes. I've tried to talk about the recognition of points where bias is possible. We need to re-review criteria. So a lot of campuses are thinking harder about engaged scholarship or digital humanities or qualitative methods as kinds of work that are not very adequately understood in terms of the criteria currently in place. That's a good thing. Rethinking. What should that product that we want to have be excellent look like? Do we really want to be so prescriptive that we are putting a constraint on creativity, innovation, the use of the widest range of possible ways to knowledge. We also need to think about things like colleagueship and service and leadership. If we really value diversity, equity, and inclusion, where is it in our evaluation processes? If it isn't there, we can't use it as a basis for judgments. So it's very important that institutions routinize review of criteria. Now, accountability below is fairly easy. One of the things that we did at Michigan, one of our deans, a particularly enlightened and terrific partner, built into the job description of department chair accountability for the climate, for diversity, equity, and inclusion, for the faculty, the students, and the staff, and also built in accountability for the results of searches. That became then a basis for the annual review conversation with department chairs. Okay, so it isn't routinely done, building accountability in below, but it can be. And that particular dean provided a great model of ways to do it. Accountability of higher ups is a lot trickier. It's a lot harder to ask provosts or presidents from below to be accountable to their alleged vision and values. This is an area where I think we need to understand better. What are the ways in which, what are the things higher ups are responsive to from inside the institution? We're aware of the things outside, legislatures, donors, lots of things. But what are the things from below that would make higher ups more accountable? I think that's something we haven't cracked, but it would be a very good thing to work on. And then the last principle is maximizing the voices and contributions of everybody. So obviously that's what we mean by true inclusion. We don't want the situation Virginia described that is all too familiar of some voices being heard and other voices, even when expressed, not being heard. That's not an inclusive environment. And we also want to motivate everybody to feel that that's so likely that they want to make a contribution because they will be heard. We all know of colleagues who have dropped out, opted out, stopped contributing in departmental or campus-wide conversations because they feel unheard for too long. So the first thing is we actually have to value difference. And this sounds good, but isn't easy. Again, it means slowing down processes to allow different opinions. Pedagogically, we know this is a good idea. If I go into a class and say, that was a great study we read, it's perfect, then a student who read that study and wondered about something is much less likely to talk about it, much less likely to ask a question about it even. So by asserting a firm clarity about how to think about this article, I can cut the discussion off. By not doing that, by inviting, what do you see as the strengths of this article? What did it accomplish? What's missing? What might be developed in future research? We don't have to undermine anything to encourage students to express a range of points of view. The same goes for everything we do. If we're in a big rush to make a decision, and we always are, then we're not going to value difference. We're going to resent it. It's going to feel like conflict. It's going to feel like digression. It's going to feel like it isn't getting us where we need to go. So we have to get more skilled at managing to allow multiple points of view to get on the table and then move toward a decision. We're not very good at it in the academy. We're not very good at allowing that to unfold and move. So frequently when people do try to value difference and let a lot of flowers bloom, they are not people who also know how to then move toward consensus or a decision, even if it's not consensual. We need to increase those capacities. We need a lot more skill at both processes. And I believe that's stuff the advanced programs have been working on, and we're not all the way there yet. One of the critical things is avoiding cues to not belonging, and there are a lot of them. So one of them is the kind of behavior that Virginia mentioned. Another is getting interrupted, cut off, the age-old, who are the pictures on the wall, who's being mentioned, who's being brought up is knowledgeable and offering important insight, past models. If those are not an inclusive list of folks, then there are cues. That's a cue. Oh, you don't really value people like me. So instead, we need to have skill at developing a broader sense of community, a broader sense of belonging that everybody can be part of. And again, I don't think we're yet there in terms of skill. I don't want to spend as much time on this as it deserves because I'm running out of time, but we need to be more thoughtful in the way we launch new faculty and the way we mentor them. The advanced community and lots of social scientists have studied how important onboarding or launching a career is and how important mentoring thoughtfully can be. It's often not. It's often a proffer of myself as a model rather than a thoughtful engagement with an individual's possibly quite different goals and values, and a thoughtful effort to support and advise the person on their own path. We need to provide lots of information. In one of our programs, launching new faculty, I was dumbfounded by the number of senior faculty who said, I really learned from this process of being in a committee offering advice to new faculty that really they need a lot of information. Like this was these were many full professors who had been presumably not providing information to new faculty. So that's a big thing we need to do, and it's news to many people. There's also a very deep literature, a profound literature about the difference between patronizing and wise mentoring, mentee-centered advising, and advising that assumes I already know how successful you can be. Patronizing mentoring is what we get when people assume, yeah, you probably can't get a job there. You can't go to graduate school there. Don't try to publish that paper in that journal. Where it's assumed that we are less than, that we can't do certain kinds of things. It can be well-intentioned, and that it's not always, but it's never the right way to go. It's always the wrong way to go. And we need faculty to understand why. And we can talk about that if people want to. Okay, the last principle is the principle of universal design. And this sounds worrisome. So we want to treat everybody equally or equitably in a way that is responsive to difference. That sounds kind of impossible, but it's not. We can appreciate difference in coming up with solutions, but we can aim for solutions that will actually be the same for everyone. And institutionally, those solutions are much more likely to be adopted, appreciated, and not resisted. In designing them, though, we have to take into account variability in human response and especially recognize that people differ within groups. All women are not the same. All African Americans are not the same. All Latinx women are not the same. We have to pay attention to the fact that thinking about a group cannot be thinking about a homogeneous entity. So we can think about whether we're being inclusive, but we can't think about a group as though it's homogeneous. So universal design emerged out of the effort to design external environments so that they would work for people like people in wheelchairs, curb cuts. And it turns out they also help people pushing strollers and people pushing grocery baskets. They even help people who are aging and have trouble lifting their foot up high to get up a tall curb. So curb cuts help everybody, but they weren't motivated by the desire to help everybody. They were motivated by the desire to help people who were wheelchair bound or had other reasons that a curb was a serious obstacle to mobility. So very often in our institutional change efforts, we can design something, and I believe the launch committees are an example of it, that will help women and people of color especially, but it will help white men too. It will help everybody. And there will be members of all of those groups who would not engage in the same practice, get the same mentoring if they didn't exist, the launch committee didn't exist. So that's a good thing. It's going to be useful to everybody. This was a cardinal belief of all of us in that famous first cohort of advanced institutions. We believed it, but we hadn't really seen the evidence that it was true. I feel that now we know that it's true from the evidence. So I'm going to end here finally. And I want to close with two things. One of them is just to suggest that we could take some time to talk about whether any of these ideas are helpful to you and your work at NSF, because we care, Virginia and I care a lot about your work at NSF. We are deeply grateful for having benefited so profoundly as individuals and institutionally from the advanced program and from individuals at NSF. But I want to take the privilege of just a minute or two to talk about the NSF advanced program's value in this moment, this celebratory moment of recognizing its history. I think the advance's impact nationally cannot be understated on the world of higher education writ large and on academic science in particular. It fostered a focus on institutional change that was simply not in the discourse. It was not out there as a serious effort at a national level. If you believe, as we do, that the only real hope for real change, lasting change, is institutional or systemic change, we weren't going to get anywhere without that. We also learned that just those words mobilized some resistance, and we've learned quickly how to overcome that resistance. That was actually really important. So putting those words out there into the ether mattered, not only because it made it a front and center focus for a lot of people, but it also helped us learn what was scary about that to some of those people. A second critical thing about the program is it encouraged change experiments across the country and across different types of institutions. Many of those experiments turned out to be successful and adaptable, usable by other institutions and other who were in and outside the advanced community. And Advance itself, the NSF Advance program, created different and new mechanisms that helped facilitate adaptation, helped encourage the kind of collaboration that might foster the community. And that's the third thing I want to mention. It's been mentioned before, but it can't be undervalued how important the fostering of a community of all of us working on institutional change was. We were able to learn from each other. We were able to support each other in the hard times. And I want to stress, as Virginia did, that we built long-term relationships. In fact, it's how Virginia and I began to know each other and then to decide to collaborate. And then last and very much not least, it fostered our connection and relationships with NSF staff. And of course, I can't close without emphasizing how incredibly important Alice was, her vision, her inclusive practices, her collaborative approach to the process of building Advance. That mattered hugely to me as a person and to our community. And I am proud to say has led to many years of connection on committees and as friends. I also want to include Jessie as someone who has meant a lot to me as I have watched her operate in this space, not as closely because she became program director after I was no longer leading a grant, just a program. She, like Alice, is a compendium of knowledge of all the projects that worked and didn't work, and both Alice and Jesse share the capacity and the action of being incredibly potent stewards of this program that seems to me to have mattered so much to so many people. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and stop talking. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Virginia Valian and Abby Stewart, for this comprehensive and salient dive into the errors and the things that we could do to start to take this systematic approach to address these issues. At this point, I would like to ask Dr. Alice Hogan, together with Dr. Faye Cobb-Payton, to moderate the question and answer portion of our seminar. Dr. Faye Cobb-Payton is one of our current NSF members of the Advanced Implementation Committee from the Directorate of Computer and Information Science and Engineering. The Advanced Implementation Committee is a committee that was formed 20 years ago to work with Alice on the implementation of the program. And to this day, they're an integral part of our program. So thank you very much to that committee and to every member of them.
Thank you. So is that my cue? Hi. Yeah, Jesse?
I think Alice has a question for the panelists, and then.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Abby and Virginia. That was a master class if I ever heard one. Your talk raised a number of questions, one in particular that I think many people who are doing this work would like to know more about is, how do you move the senior leadership forward? You know, based on your experience, are there any data-driven interventions or strategies that we ought to know about? I realize it varies over time, but what are the things you think are most effective?
Virginia, do you want to start?
No, I think you should start on that.
Well, I have a painful answer, and this will give Virginia time to think of a better one. Choose your leaders carefully. It's like choosing your parents. I was incredibly fortunate to have inherited potential collaborators to a degree that I didn't appreciate until until retrospect, that having people to collaborate with makes a huge difference at the highest level. That said, I did, the dean that I worked most closely with, he was the liberal arts college dean, so over all the fields within the program, except engineering. He was not, I think, a natural ally when we first started collaborating. And I sat down with him with the results of the first climate study. He'd been the associate dean for all of those 25 departments and units, and including the sciences. And he'd listened to the whole climate results, comparing the science departments with the non-science departments in his college. And we went through every single result. It was painstaking. He was patient. And at the end of it, I said, okay, so what do you think? And he said, I can't believe those guys have been lying to me all these years. So that was a wedge. I mean, just the fact that he was willing to take the time to look, the willingness to open his mind and to think, oh my God, there's actually a problem in this space I didn't really think there was. So that's about him. But of course, the fact that we had the data and that we invited that conversation mattered. And that was a common, I mean, I did that with other many other senior leaders. And what I learned is some were more interested and engaged than others. Many were, but it was a good test of if they tuned out fast, I knew that we weren't going to have a lot of opportunity. So that produced a many-year collaboration that I think made a lot of headway on a lot of issues. Virginia, I hope that gave you time for a better answer.
It gave me time for an answer at any rate. So first of all, the last chapter of our book does talk about this, and it particularly talks about how grassroots changes can percolate up and become part of the institution. But with respect to leaders in particular, I think being allies with them at every point along the way that one can, so making them feel and be part of things so that they can take some well-deserved credit when some things work out. Another thing is having them be part of the national conversation. So increasingly now, more and more people are talking about this. And from a purely selfish point of view, people who do a good job on this rise to other positions at other institutions. So I have tracked the careers of some people, and I've seen how they've gone from one position to the next, in part because of their commitment to have a fair and inclusive institution. And related to that is just that peer contact. One of our faculty, who was chair of their department, went to a meeting that the University of Washington had, and they mentioned that chairs were presenting. And so you, in the same way at Michigan that people had respect for the people on stride because they were their peers,
Yeah.
so too chairs have respect for what other chairs are doing. So I think bringing people in and not treating them as problems, even if they are, is a way to help them be more a part of things. One school that I went to, I spoke to the provost, who was very upset about the external advisory board review they had had, where he was castigated for his inaction. And it didn't have the intended effect that the advisory board hoped it would have. Instead, it just alienated him and made him feel whatever he did would be dismissed. So trying to be inclusive with the hires up is I think very difficult for us. I'm speaking here just for myself. We're used to arguing with people to make our point. We're used to challenging. And I don't think that works so well with administrators. So I think we need to learn how do we tune in to what administrators are concerned with and align what we want to have happen with the problems that we know they're facing. But that's really, really hard, and it's not something everybody can do.
If I
All
can
right.
add one tiny thing to what Virginia said so well, and we do talk about this in the book, if you can bring grassroots perspectives and higher up goals and vision and values together, that's the winning strategy. And that's pretty clear. Even those don't always succeed, but if you have both engines working, you're a lot more likely to get success. Adriana Kizar is the author of that work, along with collaborators. And it's very clear that's a strategy that's effective. So I think, the emphasis on collaboration rather than on challenge is really important.
All right, thanks, ladies. Abigail and Virginia, we have the second question that has come. And a lot of what you talked about earlier was around great points on your checklist, examining evaluation procedures, focusing on flawed decision-making and not bias. But a lot of power comes through in that. And to that extent, we have a question. What do you do when the EO has determined your department to be a persuasive and persistent hostile work environment for women? though it says here the dean is an advanced trained individual and is giving out information and offering college-wide, not required training with no accountability. Sexual harassment and discrimination are present, and the environment is much more toxic. So how do you respond to that? And I'll just say the person goes on to mention that the women actually are experiencing a lot of emotional toil, a lot of mental health issues over the years. And one woman has walked, several others have resigned. What do you do in those instances when you have one full tenured female and 9 tenured males? Virginia, you want to lead with that one?
I sure don't.
You sure don't.
So one thing that I want to highlight about that comment is the incredible importance of people's departments. So the previous question was about presidents, provosts, deans, but in fact, it's what happens in your department that most affects your everyday life. So if your department is hostile and uninclusive, your life is going to be miserable. The example that's being discussed, that seems to me like an example where the school needs to step in, and you need an outside chair. That department is not doing its job, and since it's been noted by the diversity officer that it isn't, I think that's a place where the department needs to be taken over until it improves. But I will turn to Abby, who is.
All right, Abby.
I'm in agreement with both points. I think the department is where the rubber meets the road for all of us. And if we're unhappy in the department, if there's bad things going on in the department, it doesn't matter what's going on anywhere else. The second point, I think, is also right. Most toxic environments have reproduced themselves as toxic environments over multiple eras. I don't know that that's true in this case, but leaving it to the system to fix itself, that's not going to work. So expecting an internal department chair, even if they change to a different internal department chair, to be able to fix it, I think that's highly unlikely. So I think this is where the system actually needs major disruption, and it takes courage on the part of administrators to do that. It's no guarantee that it'll get better, but it will enable everybody to get heard by some kind of neutral parties. To me, that would be also, I mean, I completely agree with Virginia that that's the only strategy I see. Mm-hmm. And I have seen departments like this, not happily that many, but they're hard to fix. And the only strategy I've ever seen be even helpful is having it taken over.
Okay. All right. Alice?
Yeah, thank you. A question from the audience. This was a fabulous review of where we have come from. Do you have a sense of where to go next? I presume this means with the advanced program or advanced kinds of initiatives. And either one who wants to take that, or both.
Actually, I do have something to say about that. I think many of us, not all of us, but many of us noticed how important NSF itself and the fact that we had this nice pile of money from NSF, that gave the entire effort to diversify and be inclusive, it gave it stature. And what I personally would like to see, especially for institutions that are not high resource institutions. I think NSF could play a really positive role there in helping these institutions make good on the things that they are interested in. But the minute that the NSF money leaves, other things become more important. And I think this is especially true for state universities and city universities. So the whole California state system, the city schools around the country, they are so beleaguered and they have so many things on their mind. So I don't know how NSF might play a role there, but I think NSF could be really helpful in strengthening these institutions and helping them do what they actually want to do. So that's the other thing that I've noticed, that there are most schools. So Abby and I visited with provosts of California State University 2 years ago. And they were so committed. They were so impressive, these provosts, and they were trying to do so much, but they often are trying to do so much with so little. And if NSF could figure out some way that it could play more of a role once people don't have the money anymore, I think that would be enormously helpful. The other thing is, of course, Abby's in my book tells you everything you need to know about going forward.
So I will add only something completely different, which is, I honestly think that we aren't anywhere near the end of the road on understanding how to improve the climate for productivity, for satisfaction, for retention, for anything. And we don't know how to deal with the extreme end of these extraordinarily toxic environments, but we also don't know how to address the much more mundane things that eat away at people's confidence, people's motivation, people's engagement. So I actually think there's a lot more work to be done. I mean, 20 years is not enough. I think this is a very long haul, and we need more and better ideas, more and better research. Lots of really interesting things are going on. The ongoing work right now that we didn't talk about on bystander intervention, on microaggressions and how to address them, how to improve faculty ability to notice them and respond to them rather than just watch them unfold uncomfortably and look at their feet. These are really important and they're not enough. So we need a lot more.
Okay, I think we have time for at least one more question. A question from the audience. Can you speak about the role of shared governance on equity? When does it hurt or possibly harm efforts towards gender and racial equity? Abigail, I think you're up this time.
Okay. So I guess I'm going to plead some degree of ignorance here. We all know something about the shared governance models of our own institutions, and Virginia and I have visited many others, but it hasn't always been a discussion point. I know that there's wide variation in what shared governance looks like. So I do think it can be an asset, the commitment to shared governance. It can also set up a kind of adversarial connection that we've already commented can be counterproductive. If administrators feel like the faculty governance system is simply demanding things without understanding their constraints, then the idea of collaborative problem solving isn't going to emerge. So net, I think my comment would be, first of all, that the local conditions matter a lot. And so no one size never fits all. But having said that, a general principle would be when shared governance can be collaborative about problem solving, I think that's when it's likely to be successful, and it's much less likely to be if it's in a adversarial mode.
one thing I'd add to that is I don't think we need to think about the administration as doing everything for us. There are things that we can do ourselves. And in principle, faculty senates can, and other faculty assemblies, other faculty organizations can themselves say, here are some things that we think need to be changed, and we're going to undertake to change them in our departments. So there are a lot of things that departments can do independent of what the administration is doing. One example in the book is about a department chair who figured out a way to improve the contribution of everybody by having little breakout groups in the course of a faculty meeting. That's something that can happen anywhere and will do a lot to improving people's feeling of belonging and having a voice.
Okay. All right. Alice?
I think we have time for one more question. And this is a question from the audience. How do you motivate senior leaders to admit when things are not working? Acknowledging rather than hiding behind or pretending that something affected change when it did not further damages those already marginalized. And I think I see Jessie, so this is going to be a quick answer.
So my answer would be pretty much what we've already said, which is that you motivate them by trying to get on the same side with them, that clearly that thing has had some unintended negative consequences, and how do we mitigate them together?
Sometimes you can't do anything. I think that's important to recognize as well. And one thing that I think we could benefit from is analyzing the things that don't work as well as the things that do work.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. You anticipated correctly that we are wrapping up our 90 minutes. The time has really gone by very quickly, and from the questions and the comments, everybody is very appreciative of your time and effort today, and also throughout your careers doing this work on equity. This is for all three of you, Alice, Virginia, and Abigail. Your work with Advance has been noted and has impacted many people, including myself. I would have to say I considered you all rock stars when I first started working with the program that I could barely approach at that time. I'm glad to have you have more access to you now many years later. So we are going to wrap up, and virtual applause and thank you again for your time and effort today. And for everybody else who is attending, we will be recording these sessions and posting them at some point. And if you've registered, you'll get an email with the information on how to access that to share with your colleagues who weren't able to join us. We normally would have our AAA Science and Technology Policy Fellow wrap up things for us, Dr. Utabe Beckham-Wright, but she is not able to access the internet right now. So I am going to wrap up for us, and along with my colleague Tatiana. Okay, so I would like to say thank you to all of the speakers that we've had over this past month. We've had several different people participate in our presentations over this the 5 weeks of March, fortunately. You can see them all. All here. Quite a cadre of individuals, and I wanted to make sure that I recognize that there are hundreds more people out there who have done this work and investing thousands and thousands of hours, developing proposals, researching proposals, implementing these projects at their institutions that we couldn't possibly get in 1 month of presentations to share their work, but this is just a sampling of the effort that has been going on for 20 years by these really wonderful people that have created this community of a network of support to help people who are interested in doing this work in their institutions, in their professional societies, in their other organizations that they belong to. This work is important, and I commend everybody who has invested time and effort in this work. And I want to also recognize all the program officers who have put time and effort into managing this program, designing this program, making sure that the community stays in contact and connected, and that the shepherding the program in a way that it has been able to stay in operation for 20 years. And I think be well positioned to continue to contribute important new knowledge about how to do this work effectively, not just for addressing gender equity issues, but more and more the intersection of gender and other identities, particularly race and ethnicity, that we need to pay attention to in the next 20 years. So I will end this now. Tatiana, would you like to?
I would just like to, can you move to the next slide? And I just want to say that it really takes a village to create advance. And the slide that is not shown is a slide of all the pictures of all the speakers. And like Jesse said, it's just a few, but it's really a village. So thank you to the village that is supporting me and supporting other women in academia.
Sorry, I thought I was sharing that slide. All right. Thank you, everybody. And we will talk to you again.